Have you ever had someone look at something you own, something you worked your entire life for, and declare that it should belong to them? Not ask, not offer to buy, but declare, with the full force of their own self-importance, that your property was now a community asset. That's what happened to me. The president of my homeowners association, a woman whose personality was a mix of entitled royalty and a particularly aggressive badger, decided the private lakefront that made up half my property was going to be the new community beach club. She stormed onto my land with a clipboard and a condescending smirk, pointing at the shoreline I'd spent a decade restoring, and said, "We'll need to clear these unsightly reeds for the volleyball court." It was a declaration of war. What she didn't know, what nobody in this manicured subdivision knew, was that I wasn't just some quiet guy who liked his privacy. I'm a hydrographic surveyor and civil engineer. And more than a decade before she was ever elected HOA president, I was the man the original developer hired to design, permit, and oversee the installation of every single dock, seawall, and boat lift in the entire community. She was demanding my lake, but she had absolutely no idea that I controlled every single one of their docks. This wasn't just going to be a simple no, this was going to be a lesson in due diligence, a masterclass in the fine art of catastrophic overreach. Have you ever had to teach someone a lesson they would never, ever forget? Buckle up, because this is the story of how one HOA president's ego wrote a check that my professional expertise was about to cash in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. My initial response to Brenda van der Zandt's imperial proclamation was one of calm, measured reason. I believed, perhaps naively, that a simple presentation of facts would resolve this absurdity. The following afternoon, after she'd sent a follow-up email titled Preliminary Beach Club Development Schedule, I walked over to her house, a pristine McMansion with an aggressively green lawn. I carried a file folder containing my property deed, the official county plat map clearly marking my boundaries, and the original survey I conducted myself years ago. I found her in her driveway, directing a landscaping crew with the imperious gestures of a Roman general. "Brenda," I began, holding out the folder. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about my property lines." She barely glanced at me, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, I'm sure the paperwork is all very quaint, Alex," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But we're talking about the greater good of the community. A private individual hoarding all that prime shoreline is simply inequitable." I opened the plat map, pointing to the thick, unambiguous line that ran a full 50 feet inland from the water's edge. "This isn't hoarding, Brenda. This is my private property, legally defined and recorded with the county. The HOA's jurisdiction ends right here," I said, tapping the line. She finally looked at the map, but her eyes were glazed over with indifference. "Lines on paper can be redrawn," she sniffed. "We'll have the HOA's lawyer look into it. He's very good at finding creative interpretations." The conversation was over before it began. She turned her back on me and started lecturing the landscapers about the proper angle for trimming boxwoods. 2 days later, the first official notice arrived. It was a fine for $100 for failure to maintain common area landscaping, citing the very reeds she wanted to tear out for her volleyball court, reeds that were on my private land. It was a petty, transparently ridiculous move, but it was a clear signal. This wasn't about a misunderstanding anymore. This was a power play, and she was escalating. I knew then that reason wouldn't work. Facts wouldn't work. The only thing that would work was a language she understood, leverage, and I knew exactly where to find it. Brenda's campaign against me intensified with alarming speed. She clearly believed I was a pushover, an isolated homeowner who would eventually buckle under sustained pressure. The $100 fine was followed by another for an unapproved natural barrier, referring again to my shoreline vegetation. Then, an official letter from the HOA's lawyer arrived. It was a masterpiece of hollow legal threats, filled with jargon about riparian covenants and implied community access, all of which was complete nonsense. He suggested I'd be wise to donate the land to avoid a costly lawsuit that the HOA would aggressively pursue with community funds. Worse, she started poisoning the well with my neighbors. I'd see her talking to people by the community mailbox, pointing towards my house with a look of theatrical exasperation. A few days later, a family I'd never seen before set up a picnic blanket 20 feet from my back porch. When I politely informed them they were on private property, the father grumbled, Brenda said this was community lakefront now. The gall was breathtaking. Instead of getting angry, I got methodical. I went down to my home office in the basement, a space filled with drafting tables, survey equipment, and rows of filing cabinets. This wasn't just an office. It was an archive of my entire career. I pulled out the heavy binders for the Heron's Landing development project. Dust motes danced in the light as I opened them. It all came flooding back. The endless meetings with the developer, the county planners, the Army Corps of Engineers, the State Department of Environmental Protection. I hadn't just surveyed the land. I had navigated the labyrinth of regulations that allowed this community to even exist. And that's where I found it. My aha moment. It wasn't just one thing. It was a beautiful, interconnected web of legal tripwires I myself had laid. The master permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, the one that gave the entire development lake access, was explicitly contingent on my specific parcel of land remaining an undeveloped riparian buffer zone. Its purpose was to protect water quality and wildlife habitat. Any change to its use, say, building a volleyball court, would trigger an automatic review and potential revocation of the entire community's lake access permit. But the real masterstroke, the detail I had almost forgotten, was in the individual permits for every single dock. As the engineer of record, I had written a standard but crucial clause into each one. The structural integrity and environmental compliance of this dock are subject to periodic inspection and recertification by a qualified marine engineer. The HOA, in its infinite wisdom, had never bothered to arrange these inspections. For over a decade, every single dock was technically out of compliance. Brenda thought she was coming for my land. She had no idea she was putting every resident's prized possession, their personal dock, their boat lift, their very access to the water, directly in my hands. With the full scope of Brenda's vulnerability laid bare in the project files before me, the strategy began to form. It wasn't going to be a quiet legal battle fought through lawyers. That would be slow, expensive, and it wouldn't address the root of the problem, Brenda's unchecked power and the community's passive acceptance of it. This had to be public. It had to be decisive. It had to be a spectacle that would not only end her crusade against me, but also dismantle her authority permanently. My plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 was intelligence. I needed to understand the current political climate of the HOA. For this, I reached out to George, a retired accountant who had served on the board for years before resigning in frustration over Brenda's dictatorial style. We met for coffee, and George was a goldmine. He confirmed that Brenda ran the board with an iron fist, that the other members were either intimidated by her or simply apathetic, and that the HOA's lawyer was a personal friend of her husband's who rubber-stamped her every whim. Most importantly, he told me she had called a special community-wide meeting in 2 weeks to hold a binding vote on levying a special assessment to fund the legal battle for reclaiming our community shoreline. It was the perfect stage. Phase 2 was setting the trap. I wouldn't send a cease and desist. I wouldn't engage her directly. Instead, I would use the HOA's own communication channels against them. I drafted a carefully worded letter. It was polite, professional, and unervingly vague. It stated that as a homeowner and a party of interest, I would be attending the meeting to present critical information pertaining to the community's master water access permit, individual dock compliance, and potential significant financial liabilities for every waterfront property owner. I didn't make threats. I simply stated facts and hinted at a problem they didn't know they had. I paid the HOA's administrative fee to have the letter officially mailed to every single homeowner. Phase 3 was the execution. I would let Brenda whip the crowd into a frenzy. I would let her paint me as the villain. I would let her bring her grand plan to the very brink of a vote. And then, at the moment of maximum dramatic tension, I would stand up and calmly, methodically, and with irrefutable evidence, detonate the entire foundation of her argument and, in the process, turn every homeowner's anxiety away from me and directly toward her. My presentation wouldn't be emotional. It would be a clinical execution using the language of engineering, law, and finance. She wanted a war over a strip of land. I was going to show her she had accidentally wandered into a minefield of her own making. My letter landed in mailboxes throughout the community like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples started immediately. The neighborhood Facebook group, usually a sleepy forum for lost cats and contractor recommendations, lit up with speculation. What critical information? What potential liabilities? My calculated vagueness was working perfectly, creating a low hum of anxiety that Brenda couldn't easily dismiss. She tried, of course. She posted a response full of bluster and condescension, calling my letter a desperate scare tactic from a selfish individual trying to prevent our community from realizing its full potential. She assured everyone that her lawyers had thoroughly vetted the project and that I had no legal standing. To double down on her confidence, she posted professionally rendered images of the Heron's Landing Beach Club. There it was, my quiet, tree-lined shore replaced with a sand-covered expanse, a garish tiki hut bar, a volleyball net, and rows of uniform lounge chairs. The image was captioned, "Don't let one person stand in the way of progress. Your yes vote on the 15th will make this dream a reality." Her arrogance was my greatest ally. She was so convinced of her own power and my powerlessness that she was doing my work for me, raising the stakes and ensuring the entire community would be emotionally invested in the outcome of the meeting. George called me, chuckling. "You've got her rattled," he said. "She's been calling board members all day, telling them to present a unified front. She's treating this like a political campaign." Meanwhile, I was a ghost. I didn't respond on social media. I didn't engage with the neighbors who gave me quizzical looks as I checked my mail. I let her narrative run wild, knowing that the higher she built her platform of promises, the more devastating the fall would be. My time was spent in quiet preparation. I scanned the key documents. The master permit with the riparian buffer clause highlighted, a sample individual dock permit with the inspection clause circled, and a satellite map of the entire community with every single dock numbered. I created a simple but devastating PowerPoint presentation. Slide 1, the master permit. Slide 2, the clause that voids it. Slide 3, a list of every dock address. Slide 4, the clause that makes them illegal. Slide 5, the estimated cost of compliance per household. It was a 5-slide story of absolute leverage, and I was the only one who knew how it ended. The night before the meeting, I took a walk down to my shoreline. The reeds swayed in the evening breeze, and a pair of herons stood silently in the shallows. This was the peace Brenda was trying to shatter. She thought this was about sand and volleyball. She was about to find out it was about something far more fundamental. The community clubhouse was packed. I had never seen so many of my neighbors in one place. The air was thick with a mixture of anticipation and hostility. Brenda had set up a projector at the front of the room, and a looping slideshow of her beach club renderings played on the screen, a constant reminder of the prize she was dangling in front of them. I spotted George near the back and gave him a subtle nod. I took a seat in the last row, my laptop bag resting at my feet. A few people turned to glare at me, whispering behind their hands. I remained impassive, a quiet observer in a drama of my own creation. Brenda, dressed in a sharp blazer, stood at the podium, radiating confidence. She began the meeting by dispensing with the usual formalities and launched directly into her crusade. "Friends, neighbors," she began, her voice resonating with rehearsed passion. "For too long, our community's greatest asset, our beautiful lake, has been partially held hostage. A single property owner has monopolized a shoreline that belongs to all of us in spirit, if not in name." She went on for 10 minutes, painting me as a reclusive millionaire, an outsider who cared nothing for community values. She spoke of children who deserved a place to swim, of families who deserved a place to gather, of property values that would soar with the addition of a shared amenity. It was a masterful performance, and I could feel the mood of the room solidifying against me. She finally arrived at the crescendo. "The board has been advised by our legal counsel that we have a strong case for eminent domain through community covenant, but it will require legal resources. Tonight, we are voting on a one-time special assessment of $500 per household to create our legal fund to reclaim our shoreline." A wave of murmurs went through the crowd, but they were largely supportive. $500 seemed a small price to pay for the paradise she was promising. "It's time to vote," she declared, a triumphant smile on her face. "All in favor of the special assessment, please raise your hand." Hands started to go up across the room. This was the moment. I stood up. "Before you finalize that vote," I said, my voice calm but carrying easily through the suddenly silent room, "I believe I am the homeowner in question, and I have that critical information I mentioned in my letter." Every head in the room swiveled towards me. Brenda's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a flash of irritation. Mr. Jensen, this is a homeowner vote, she snapped. You've had your chance to cooperate. This is out of order. I believe what I have to say is entirely in order, I replied, walking steadily toward the front of the room. I held a USB drive in my hand. It concerns the legal and financial well-being of every single person here. I just need 5 minutes and the use of your projector. I'm sure you're all in favor of making a fully informed decision, aren't you? I had framed it as a matter of transparency, a difficult position for her to refuse without looking like a tyrant. The murmuring in the crowd grew, now tinged with curiosity. Someone in the front row said, "Let him speak." Reluctantly, Brenda gestured to the laptop. 5 minutes, Mr. Jensen. I plugged in my USB drive, and the rendering of the tiki bar was replaced by the crisp, black and white title page of a government document. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, permit number 3-4457. B. Heron's Landing Development. I picked up the microphone. Good evening. My name is Alex Jensen. Brenda is correct that I am the homeowner of the property in question. What she failed to mention is that I was also the lead hydrographic engineer for the entire Heron's Landing project. A stunned silence fell over the room. I could see people exchanging confused looks. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a high-resolution survey map of the community. I had highlighted my property in red. This is my land, I said, pointing a laser at the red zone. And this, I clicked again, zooming in on a specific paragraph in the permit document, is Condition 12C of the master permit that grants this entire community lake access. I read the highlighted text aloud. Permit approval is contingent upon Parcel 7A, as designated on the attached survey, remaining in its natural state as a riparian buffer zone to ensure water quality and habitat preservation. Any modification or development of this parcel will result in the immediate suspension of this permit pending a full environmental impact review. The silence was now absolute. I let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. For those of you who aren't familiar with this process, a suspension of the master permit means all subordinate activities are rendered illegal. That includes boating, swimming, and, most importantly, the physical existence of every dock on this lake. A collective gasp went through the room. The tide of opinion was beginning to turn. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from a political rally to a funeral. The hostile glares directed at me were now looks of dawning horror. They were beginning to understand that their $500 fantasy beach club was about to cost them everything. But I wasn't finished. This master permit, however, is only the first part of the problem, I announced, my voice remaining level and factual. I clicked to the next slide. It was a simple, stark list of every single waterfront address in the Heron's Landing community, organized by street. I'm sure you all recognize your addresses here. I gave them a moment to find their own homes on the list. As the engineer of record, I not only secured the master permit, but I also designed and filed the individual permit for every single one of your docks. I clicked to the next slide, which displayed a boilerplate copy of one of those permits. I had highlighted a single, devastating clause. Please direct your attention to Section 4, Subclause B, I said, again reading the text aloud. The structural integrity and environmental compliance of this structure must be inspected and recertified every 3 years by a licensed marine engineer to remain valid. Failure to do so renders the structure unpermitted and subject to immediate removal at the owner's expense. The silence was broken by a single, panicked voice from the crowd. We've never had an inspection. I looked out at the sea of pale faces. I know, I said softly. As far as I can tell, not a single dock in this community has been inspected since its installation over a decade ago. Which means, according to state and federal law, every single dock on this lake is currently an illegal structure. The room erupted. The low murmur exploded into a cacophony of panicked chatter. People were turning to their neighbors, their faces etched with fear and fury. I saw one man frantically typing on his phone, likely searching for the cost of dock removal. Brenda stood at the podium, her face ashen. Her power, so absolute just minutes before, was visibly disintegrating. This is a lie. A trick, she stammered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. To seal the deal, I advanced to my final slide. Therefore, I said, my voice cutting through the noise, to protect myself from professional liability, I have been left with no choice. Tomorrow morning, I will be legally obligated to file a comprehensive notice of noncompliance with the Army Corps of Engineers and the State Department of Environmental Protection, citing every address on this list. I'd advise you all to refrain from using your docks until this matter is resolved. The fines for utilizing an unpermitted structure can be substantial. I had just turned their most prized asset into a liability. The trap hadn't just been sprung. It had vaporized the entire foundation of Brenda's authority. The chaos in the clubhouse was immediate and total. My calm statement about filing the notice of noncompliance acted like a detonator. The homeowners, who just minutes ago were ready to fund Brenda's legal war against me, now turned on her with the ferocity of a cornered animal. A man in the front row, the HOA treasurer, shot to his feet. "Brenda, is this true? Did you do any due diligence? Are our docks really illegal?" His voice was shaking with rage. Another woman yelled from the back, "You were going to make us pay $500 to sue the one person who could have warned us about this? Are you insane?" The focus was no longer on me. I was just the messenger. The fury was directed squarely at the woman at the podium who had led them to the edge of this cliff. Brenda tried to regain control, banging a gavel she produced from behind the podium. "Order! Order! He's just trying to scare you. Your lawyer is a hack," someone shouted. The HOA's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who had been sitting smugly in the front row, now looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He was frantically scrolling through his phone, no doubt realizing how badly he had failed his client and exposed the community to massive risk. George, the former board member, stood up. He had a powerful voice that commanded attention. "I think the immediate question," he said, looking directly at Brenda, "is not the special assessment. The immediate question is the catastrophic failure of leadership that has brought us to this point." I moved to table the vote on the assessment indefinitely. A chorus of "I" filled the room, and I second that with a new motion. Another homeowner chimed in, his voice dripping with ice. "I move for a vote of no confidence in our president, Brenda van der Zandt, and call for her immediate resignation." The room erupted in applause. The motion was seconded by a dozen people at once. Brenda stood there, speechless and pale, as her entire world crumbled around her. Her crusade for my land had ended in her own public execution. The community she sought to unite against me had become a unified mob demanding her head. I simply gathered my laptop, stepped away from the podium, and watched justice unfold. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and decisive. The vote of no confidence in Brenda was nearly unanimous. She didn't even try to defend herself. She simply gathered her papers with trembling hands and fled the clubhouse amidst a storm of angry questions and accusations. She submitted her official resignation via email before midnight. Her reign was over, not with a whimper, but with a spectacular, self-inflicted bang. The next morning, the remaining board members, led by the now interim president, the treasurer who had first challenged Brenda, called me. Their tone was a complete reversal, no longer demanding, but deeply apologetic and, frankly, terrified. They begged me not to file the report with the Army Corps of Engineers and asked what they needed to do to make things right. I had achieved my primary objective. The threat to my property was gone. Now it was about restoring peace on my terms. I told them I would hold off on filing the report for 30 days on two conditions. First, the HOA was to issue a formal, written apology to me, retracting all fines and legal threats, and circulate it to every homeowner. Second, they had to agree to a comprehensive plan to bring all community docks into full compliance. The apology arrived in my inbox that afternoon and was posted on the community website. The next step was the docks. This was my chance to be not the antagonist, but the solution. I offered my professional services to conduct the necessary inspections and oversee the recertification process for every dock. I wasn't going to do it for free, but I offered them a group rate that was a fraction of what any outside firm would charge. It was a gesture of goodwill, a way to turn a crisis into a constructive project. Over the next few months, I went from being the neighborhood pariah to the community's indispensable expert. I inspected every dock, creating a detailed report for each homeowner on necessary repairs. The new HOA board worked with me constructively, establishing a clear, fair process. The community, humbled and grateful, followed the rules. Brenda van der Zandt put her house on the market a month later and moved away. The Heron's Landing Beach Club became a cautionary tale, a local legend about the dangers of arrogance and the importance of knowing who you're dealing with. My peace was restored. My shoreline remained a quiet sanctuary. I learned that the best defense isn't a good offense, but superior knowledge, strategically applied. The quietest person in the room isn't always the weakest. Sometimes, they're the one who designed the room and knows where all the load-bearing walls are. So let me ask you this. What hidden expertise do you have that the world just hasn't pushed you to reveal yet?